The word why. What a curious word. The kind of word that can make us cringe, feel defensive, or even distant. But sometimes why is the key. A key that can unlock so much to our lives. Join me as we explore the why with fascinating contributors to the world. Those that entertain us, inform us, teach us about life, and if we're lucky, inspire the next in all of us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and welcome to Headroom, a production of Rainlight and co-produced by Old Soul. Let's go.
Well, for those of you that were looking for a conversation that would take you down a number of rabbit holes and really question or at least pose big questions and hopefully connect on really an emotional, platform and perspective, I really think that that's going to happen today. I know it will for me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. This individual, John Pavlovitz, he has written 7 books in 9 years. That alone, we were talking off air, I think is an incredible achievement, but he's asking some really big questions, and we're going to talk about some serious things as well. And there's something about the way in which John has put together his thoughts, his experiences that has just really transcended audiences across the globe. And look, it's going to be my responsibility on your behalf, the audience, to sort of pull these elements out. But we're going to be speaking with John, and his latest book just came out, Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. John's a writer, pastor, activist, and storyteller from Wake Forest, North Carolina. Over the past decade, his thought-provoking blog, Stuff That Needs to Be Said, has reached a diverse worldwide audience with over 100 million views. A 25-year veteran in the trenches of local church ministry, he is committed to equality, diversity, and justice, both inside and outside faith communities. His books include A Bigger Table, Stuff That Needs to Be Said, and If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. He currently directs Empathetic People Network, a vibrant online community that connects people from all over the world who want to create a more compassionate planet. Now, maybe you're catching me at a good time, John, but I have recently come back from Tanzania, going deep into the bush to understand the implications of water insecurity, really, and no pun intended, but the trickle-down effect of not having infrastructure and water on the growth and development and health, physically and mentally, of young women, of how we can care for the unborn and trying to support pregnant moms, what it does to communities. And so your title around, worth fighting for, and finding courage, right? It really resonates with me in this time, because when you step outside of a Western culture, you are sort of, it's like a breath of fresh air and or a stark reminder of all of the things that I think the West takes for granted, and that we lose a sense. We with every sort of passing year, with every passing or development or iteration and innovation, we sort of lose this connection to sort of who we are and how we are in relation to others. And I feel like you've got a fingerprint in this, that you there's something about it. So help me understand, when you found your voice, John, when was it that you said, and it may not be that it's this book, it could have been the second book, but I always feel people find sort of a voice and they go, I trust my voice. I trust what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, and I think I have something to contribute. Was there a pivotal moment that you felt that?
Well, Rod, thanks for having me. First of all, it's so great to be with you. And I think it was an incremental kind of revelation down along the journey. But I think primarily it began when I was in college. I had lived in central New York and had really a wonderful upbringing, was surrounded by people who loved me and supported me. But it was a fairly sheltered environment. And when I arrived in Philadelphia for college, it was as if the world expanded for me. And I was getting what I would say are truer stories about people that I had false stories about. And the short of it is that those stories started to change me. And one of the things that happened for me is life began to argue with my theology. And I think that often happens, or life argues with the story that we've always told ourselves, however that works. And we have a choice. Do we lean into the new information, or do we double down on the old story? And so for me, that period of time was really catalytic in helping me ask better questions. And that's simply what I've been doing for the past couple of decades now.
What is it like to be, well, I don't know why the word came to my mind. You're not a contrarian, but there are environments and ecosystems that may think of you in that way because you are unafraid to talk about things in the room that we know are there, and they may be uncomfortable, but you are willing, and this is me speaking, you're willing to be courageous enough to say that out loud. And I know that you were a pastor, 25, maybe going on 27 years. You changed churches, and you are continuing to sort of expand the ministry, and you get pushback. You get pushback to the point where it's not a fit anymore. And that, to me, like, look, it's like when an elevator gets stuck between two floors.
Yes.
You didn't run from that. I don't think you called for help for that, but it's like you sort of leaned down and you wanted to peer and see sort of what was on the floor that you didn't have direct access to, and you bring people with you. And that's when the blog took off, and that's when these things happen. So what is it like to be seen in a way that maybe you don't see yourself, but you understand the long tail benefit of that?
Certainly. I think being in ministry was something that I had never planned, Rod. And so that it happened organically and through volunteering. And over the course of years, I decided to leave my full-time career as an art director and enter into pastoral ministry. So I think I went into that world with different eyes and a different set of questions or priorities. And sometimes I was running into things in the context of the local churches where I was a part of that were simply givens in those environments that I didn't think should be, or I was questioning why those positions existed or those realities. And I, as comfortably as I could, began just nudging those areas with questions. And what I realized was, in many environments, that questioning was a liability for me as a pastor, because many of the systems or the churches were about control and not entertaining difference. And I really thought that a church community, like any community, is made better by an exchange of ideas, by bringing in the uncomfortable things and having that messiness, because it always made our communities better afterward. And so that's really something I committed to entering into that mess. And it's something that I still do, because for me, originally, it was the idea that as a Christian, that God was not intimidated by those questions, only insecure human beings were. But really, in a larger context, truth is always going to be better if we can embrace the totality of the information around us. And so in so many cases, we don't like that because it brings turbulence. And turbulence, though, is a good thing.
So let's explore not spirituality, but maybe the construct of church and what a following is. Because I would love to understand, or take me inside your mind when you just are alone in your thoughts and you're thinking about it. Because if you've had 100 million people that have really sort of downloaded, for a better word, or that they've consumed your concepts, your ideas, big questions that you're asking in your perspective, you could argue that you've sort of created what might be considered a following, very much akin to maybe a formal religion with a church that has four walls and and I'm wondering, how do you sort of keep yourself in sort of the authentic element of, it's not about having the answers, but it's about being able to pull together different variables in life and ask the question and really recognize patterns that I think other people have maybe been feeling, but they may not be able to put words to. How do you keep yourself honest in some form or fashion so that you don't become the very thing that constrained sort of your own evolution in the way in which you looked at life, people, diversity, and trying to not live on the margins, but to understand the whole?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think it begins with the idea that I consider myself now, rather than a pastor or an author, but a collector of stories, kind of a war correspondent. and I'm allowed access to people from over the world through my virtual travels and through traveling, in person. And I sit with people and I just ask them what's happening here on the ground so that I can tell the folks back home. And I think that gives me a constant focus on, this is not just about me or my opinion. It's really about looking for those patterns in the disparate narratives and seeing where the commonalities are. What are the common pains and suffering that's happening? And then it's really about, checking my motives every day and making sure that there's a purity to what I'm doing. Am I still committed to the same things? And so that's really critical, centering on those stories. And it's really a beautiful thing because I've been fortunate that when I first reached some sort of national platform with the writing, it came through a variety of different pieces. So one was on grief, another might have been political, another one was on school shootings. And it allowed me to have this really disparate gathering of people come around the writing as a hub. And so I try to focus on that. Why are they all there? They don't share the same theology or politics, but there are commonalities. And so I press into those things so that it's not about people coming to me. It's just I'm hosting something, a tribe of affinity, I would say.
What role does curiosity play in your your daily construction of how you go about your life?
Well, I think that's huge. We talk a lot in some of the workshops that I do about having this continual posture of curiosity and realizing that the other person, regardless of how you feel about them initially, they always have something that they can share about their experience that is going to enrich yours. And the greatest danger, I think, of the kind of tribalism that we're immersed in is that we can begin to get a shorthand description of people, or we stereotype them or caricature them. But the truth is there are these, complex experiences of being human that we're all sharing. And that's, to your question earlier, I think it's realizing that we are an interdependent community. We are a single interdependent community, and we are tethered to one another in ways that we can't even realize. And it's trying to also, keep that in mind as we engage people.
So the title of the book, Worth Fighting For. So if you'll go down the rabbit hole with me, I get dismayed, and this is where I think that we'd probably share the same table together. So there's a lot that I am definitely in line with you on, and I actually agree. I love the concept of worth fighting for. But when we talk about the tribalism that's out here in sort of our world, and we look at sort of the lack of empathy, it's all about me and nothing about anybody else. It makes me ask, it's like when people say, well, I want to go back to when it was good. And I kind of say, well, when was it good? And who was it good for? Because I live in a state, John, in Tennessee, where we're banning books, and we're only banning books with people of color.
Yep.
And I sit here and say, now, wait a minute, why is that happening? We had the local school district, last year they banned an online book service it was like a Netflix for books. What they didn't realize, John, was that most of the people that were using those books were families who had children with special needs. And they did it because you had one or two people that basically said there's a handful of books, if that's being very kind in the amount, that they didn't agree with. And so they then wanted to impose their will. So it's a long preamble of saying, when we talk about something being worth fighting for, how do we understand, or how do we sort of split the atom on what you're talking about? And also, does that take us back to a time when we were even more or less, now maybe it's up for debate, but where maybe it was better for a certain group of people? Like, that's my concern, is how do we understand what we're fighting for if we look back and we say, was that authentic? Was that real? Was it good? Because maybe it was good for me because I'm a white male, but that doesn't mean it was good for anybody else.
That's the crux of it, really. It's realizing that what we're fighting for is, if anything, as Americans, we're fighting with the mythology of America, and maybe we're fighting for the aspirations of what America maybe wants to be or has claimed to want to be, but as we know, has not incarnated at all. And so the things that I think for me are worth fighting for are always going to be pushing against privilege and really whiteness, frankly, and the sort of culture that has always been dominant here. It's really, my first book was called A Bigger Table, and that has been the journey. It's about expanding this table, and not just to even people within our borders. It's realizing that there is a world outside of America that is valid and beautiful, and there are people there that have every right to experience wholeness and health that we do. So I think, and what that kind of fight is going to do is sometimes I think we're always going to be, as empathetic people, in the tension between our convictions and our relationships. So sometimes the things we're talking about, people are going to share those convictions, and often they are not. And even people we love, people we are close to, we are going to have to make a decision. Do I try to preserve this relationship, or do I lean into my convictions, maybe at the cost of that relationship, because marginalized, vulnerable, oppressed people need to be included in a way that they have not? So there's definitely a tension that we're always in.
So, John, tell me if I'm wrong, or if you have a different perspective on this. I think it's, obviously it's easy to identify those elements in life that are loud, that are bright, that are sort of flashpoints. And we can sort of wrap opinions around whatever those are, events, people, communities, that sort of a thing. But I struggle. When we talk about sort of the middle, there's no middle class, maybe, is sort of the foundation of this question here. I find myself in public settings in suburban America around people that are well-intentioned, thoughtful, nice, well-educated, or at least educated to a certain level. But beneath that, there is a dearth of sort of substance that I don't even know if they have convictions. And so I'm wondering, how do you connect? Like, how do we understand connecting to those that are a part of this sort of apathetic, especially in political circles, right? It's like, I'll see people who complain maybe on Facebook, but they don't vote. They don't understand the connection between a tax dollar and a local park. And yet,
Right.
When and I know you travel, and I was recently in Sweden, the Swedish know more about our political system than I would contend the majority of highly educated Americans. And so I'm concerned about, like, I can join you on what is worth fighting for and understanding those elements, but how do we sort of tap into those that it's like the EKG, that we're not getting a reading on the things that you think would sort of undergird what it means to maybe be an American. Maybe this goes to the mythology or the aspirational elements of what we think it is to be American, because Uncle Sam is one of the greatest marketing efforts ever undertaken on planet Earth.
Yes.
You talk to people who say, like, wasn't he real? No. This was a marketing campaign. So help me understand that. How do you identify, or how can we connect with those that they go to work, they come home from work, they take their kids to soccer, but there's just it feels as if there's nothing beneath that layer of skin or the veneer of what it means to be a suburbanite to some degree. And maybe it's not just those in suburbia, but that's sort of my experience.
Well, I think that's primarily where it hits, because there's something very seductive about the trappings of suburbia, and they give us a sense that everything's okay, and they give us a false insulation. It's almost like being in a car, when we run into people and we feel like we can say or do different things, or we're insulated from the reality. And I think the same way that America works, we work as individuals. We all have a story that we tell ourselves about our own goodness and our own desire to be a positive presence in the world. And there is, I think, an intellectual laziness. And I've seen this in the church, where people want a shorthand religion. So they just want a pastor to tell them what they're supposed to believe, and so they can go about their day. And then the same is true about our values and the political environment. People want something quick that they can wrap their arms around and feel like they're contributing, but there's really, as you said, there's no depth there. And so that's the challenge. It's sort of waking people up to the realities around them and stripping away all the noise that kind of prevents them from seeing what is really happening. And the urgency that we should be living with, I think that's missing in so many people who are in the maybe upper middle class suburban environments.
What do you think, John, is the magic of the words that you write? I find that it's really hard, and you do a very nice job of this. It's very hard to, I think, not fall into a trap of, this is what you should do. Like, this is, everybody's a speaker, everybody's an author, everybody hosts a podcast, everybody, right?
Yes.
And so everybody has a brand even outside of their 9 to 5. How do you balance when you know sort of at your own core that we all sort of say, I know what the answer to this is, or I have enough life experience, but you know that if you come across that way, you potentially wipe away a potential audience that is really needing you to sort of ease them into what we're talking about here. Because I sense you're in for the long game. You understand, right? Hence all the writing that you're doing, that that is a journey. It doesn't even have to be said that it's spiritual, at least from outside of your world in that way. I can interpret it and say, this is about sort of evolving as a human. So how do you thread that needle?
Headroom is produced by Old Soul, a one-stop marketing agency that understands the power of brand and nuance. Reach out to my guy Matt at Old Soul and supercharge your brand and content strategy. That's Old Soul. Shoot Matt a note at aoldsoul.com. That's AOLDSOUL.com. And now, back to our guest.
Well, I think it's there. What I learned in the context of the local church was that certainty was sacred there, and questioning and doubts and pushing back against the accepted norms was frowned upon, and that works everywhere. And so I think if we stay in a posture where we are saying, I'm going to have the humility, I can hold my convictions extremely tightly, and I think I've reached them for valid reasons, and I think the process has been really, sound. But I also could be wrong, or I realize that I've argued with my former self so often that I want to have the humility to realize that I could probably do that again. And if we stay in that place where there is some humility and there is that curiosity we spoke about, I think it can prevent us from being the answer people. And what I do that often, strangely, gets the most kind of vehement pushback is just simply asking the questions without providing answers, because no one wants to take the time to have an existential crisis. And I think when you ask difficult questions, it causes people to step into that place.
So you're saying that when you ask questions, that's the flashpoint for them. It's not even, you haven't even given your perspective or even just an answer.
Right. I mean, I think for me, it began in the world that I was a part of in the local church, where I would say we believe this, but then how can we align ourselves with this? And that's all you would need to do. Or I would give them a teaching from Jesus and say, tell me how you connect the dots from these words about loving, the immigrant or the stranger, and then this policy that you're supporting. So you allow whatever person's morality, whatever their thought process is, to do the work within them. And once that happens, it's really out of your hands. So if you can ask the question that causes some internal disruption, then you've done what you should be doing.
What do you attribute our desire to avoid the pregnant pause, the silence, and to basically categorize our lives where we can just put things on shelves, that we have to have some certainty? I love that, the certainty is sacred kind of thought process. What is it about? What have you learned through your travels, through your questioning, through the audience that you develop, that gives you some level of, perspective, where it's becoming clearer in sort of the picture that you're seeing and that you're ultimately painting?
Well, Rod, one of the things I realized was that there are kind of three forces on people all the time: fear, grief, and loneliness. And regardless of our politics or our theology or where we live, those are all a part of what it means to be human. And so it's trying to continually tap into that, realizing that we are all trying to figure this out and none of us have the answers. And the danger is we want to appear as though we do. And so there's this pretending that we go through, and this performance art that becomes our lives. And what I like to do is strip away that and say, hey, I don't know what's going on here. I'm just doing my best. We're all experiencing a day we've never been to, in a life we never asked to live, and none of us asked to be here. So there's an element of empathy that I have for the individual human experience. And I think the longer you dwell on that, the better you're going to be.
Do you think we have the skills, or do we have the infrastructure, using that term very broadly, to support that inquisitiveness, that curiosity that may reflect poorly on ourselves if we start to go down that path, in asking big questions, in sitting in the silence? Do we have enough practice at that? Because I wonder sometimes, like, are we just sending people to the wolves? It's like, are they just going to be falling off the cliff because they've not spent a lifetime, depending, no matter where they are sort of in their life cycle, in practicing these elements, right? It's like,
yeah,
we have to have the certainty. We can never sort of live in the void. And what I'm hearing from you is, and I agree, that's kind of where the beauty is to understand and get settled within that, to say, I'm going to learn something today. I'm going to meet John, and you're going to make me think differently tonight when I'm at a soccer practice. Like, that to me is the power of sort of an openness and a willingness to not have the answer and to actually experience life as it's coming.
Well, and that's the challenge, that, aside from something like a spiritual community, there are not a lot of options for adult human beings to engage in substantive conversations for the long haul and really over time to process these things. I get a real sense of joy when I travel the country, because the people we've been talking about who may not share politics or theology or life stage, but they come together around the writing as a hub, or they've connected with me. But then I get to have this experience of this community that really transcends the models that exist. But then there's no way to sustain that, which is why we've created this online community to try to give adults a place to go that says, it's going to be natural. This is what we do here. We wrestle together with difficult ideas without a solution, without everything being summed up in 45 minutes. And I think if we can find ways to do that in other areas of our society, we're going to be better off, but we're not built that way. I think community has really taken a hit. We have the illusion of community through social media, which is one form, but it has its limits, right?
Let's sort of turn into a more specific topic, because I'd love to get your perspective on this, because I know this is something that just rattles around in my head and I can't square it, is understanding a world where, and the sort of the MAGA, thought process, the extreme fringes, and how we get to such a point where information is cheap, but my allegiance is valuable. And I don't understand how we can evolve in so many ways, and we can have electric cars and hybrids, and we can innovate we can go to the moon, but yet we actually are proving that we're a pretty simple species that is highly, easily influenced against our better judgment in large degree, it seems. And I'm not even trying to say this is a right or left side of the argument. It's just the way in which we're processing information, where we're not processing it at all. How should we understand that if we're trying to build empathy, we're trying to sort of pump empathy within the ecosystem that is our country?
Well, when I look at this Christian nationalist movement, Trumpism, and try to figure it all out, when I spoke about those, grief, fear, and loneliness, I think when I look at that, I see the worst of religion and the worst of politics leverages fear, phobia, prejudice, and it runs on the engine of requiring an enemy, an encroaching adversary, some sort of threat. And then you combine that with the loneliness of people being isolated emotionally and physically because of COVID. What a movement like the MAGA movement did is it gave people a sense of foundness for whatever reason, some gap that they had. It gave them a sense of community, that their identity is now tied up in this person. And that's how you see people who are committed to everything, regardless of reality, regardless of data. So going back to our earlier discussion, it's almost impossible to reach someone when they have an alternate reality that they base their decisions on. And that's a huge challenge. So how can I have empathy for someone like that? And it's always looking at the reality that they are assailed by the difficulties of life to the point where they have embraced something that is antithetical to humanity, and they don't even realize it anymore. And I don't know how we answer that other than to say to be aware that it's happening, that there's an environment that has been created where people found a voice or belonging in something that is actually predatory toward them.
Does it reveal something about us that's been dormant for decades, or we had diversions? I mean, I can't think that this is just something that's new, that's sprouted. It's like a, Pandora's box within our own gene pool that said, even with data and more information, keep turning in whatever direction that continues to isolate and marginalize. Because to your earlier point, I do think we all have some level, maybe not as much as I would have hoped, of empathy, of concern for those within our sort of purview. How do you square that? Is it that this is just sort of, we have history repeating itself and it just happens to be within the construct of a more evolved sort of technology, the way in which we live from a resource perspective? Like, how do you understand that?
I see it as, obviously one politician didn't create anything, just simply revealed a lot about who we are. But I think it was in someone of that stature, that platform, giving people permission to embrace things that maybe they hid for the sake of decorum before, or maybe they felt badly about feeling, but now they embrace it. And so once you see that happening, there's almost just a shift that happens in the way that people interact with others. And so that's part of it. And then you combine it with social media and the internet. It's not that it's inherently evil, but the speed and the volume at which information is hitting us, we don't have time to sit with things long enough to process complex ideas. So as we were talking about earlier, what that's done is say, okay, I have to have an opinion right now on this, so I'm just going to put it out there. And that's the place we've lost that pause, that we've lost that place to simply sit with a complex idea and wrestle with the variables. And how we go back is going to be really difficult. How we reclaim a pace that affirms our humanity is going to be difficult.
Unpack for me the concept of responsibility. When there are when we think about all the people that are smart, that have had incredible experiences, there's a small subset that decide to contribute to scholarship, to a narrative, and to do that publicly. And when I talk to people sort of off record or off camera, there can be a sense of loneliness. It can be a sense that it's almost like you've got a following that you may, even if you never meet the people that follow or read, you can it's like a persona that is built, and you feel connected and a responsibility to contribute, to keep adding to what you've done, because there's an audience that says, John, you speak to me. You're an outlet for me that is sanity or whatever it is for that individual. How do you wrestle with that responsibility, if it's that? And if it's not, how do you think about it with regards to your contribution in the way that you can?
Well, that is huge. And it's something that, for me, I joke, that when I originally began this journey, I'm fired from a church. And a couple weeks later, I write this blog post called If I Have Gay Children, and it goes viral. And I'm getting calls from the Ellen Show and CNN. And I'm on CNN the next day and talking about this. And under my name, it says John Pavlovitz, pastor. And I said, it could have said unemployed and currently despondent. And I saw the sort of ridiculousness of social media. And that helped me kind of keep going with that humility again, that says, okay, this is all artificial. But the other is not becoming beholden to your audience in the same way that pastors that I experienced, they would start with this congregation, they would have a spiritual conviction to do their work, but then they slowly felt the collective expectations of their parishioners, and that forced them to soften their language or change what they were saying. And so that can happen with an online audience of any kind. So for me, it's always been about I don't represent, the left. I don't represent progressive Christianity. I'm a single human being having this experience of life, asking the questions I'm asking. And the people who choose to, gather around the writing are people who are asking the same questions, having some of the same prompts, and wrestling with the same ideas. But there's nothing that I can do to sort of steer them. I just simply, if they find something of value there. So it's trying to remember that I don't exist to support an audience. I'm there to share my experience of life, and hopefully it's helpful to some people.
So I loved your concept of being a war correspondent, but I want to push on that a little bit and understand what resonates the most with you and for you, which and or sort of is a byline to you, because I see advocate for humanity, like you're advocating for the human experience on so many different levels. It's very layered.
Yeah.
How do you think about how people interpret your words? Do they interpret it as advice? Do they interpret it as something potentially higher than, you did come from the church in that regard. I'm sure that some people follow you and they're extracting that element, or they're infusing it maybe with that
right
sensibility. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's difficult, because I'll walk into a room and realize that there are people who are coming to hear me speak, and they have a very, clear understanding or feeling about who I am, or what that relationship they have with me and the writing is. And I really know nothing about that. And so I know that for some people, I'm redeeming a spirituality they grew up rejecting, or I'm telling them something that maybe they haven't heard someone say in my capacity. But so a lot of it is trying not to worry too much about their expectations of me, and just am I honoring the stories that I'm getting and the stories that I'm relaying to people. So I think all that to say, I think we reach each other on a human level, that I'm tapping into something where they say, the idea of compassion comes from the word bowels. And there's this phrase in the ancient world that said, I'm twisted in my bowels about this. And I always ask people, what twists you in your bowels? What keeps you up at night? What boils your blood? What makes you really frustrated? And we lean into those burdens together. And so that's really, I think, what the work does. It exposes those pains and allows us to move into them.
What were you like as a boy? What was your personality? How did I understand you?
I mean, I was, 10 years old, 11, 12, whatever, I was a lover of comic books. So the idea of the superhero, of being a helper, of, fighting injustice, I think that was always there. I'm a lover of music. So the storytellers through songs, that was always huge to me. And I was an artist. So I wanted to capture the world and present it to people. So I think, without realizing it, those things have been through lines throughout my life, is trying to be a storyteller and trying to tap into what's good about the world and make sure that it's preserved.
Tell me about your so back then, your radar system. Could you pick up on things that were going on that were unjust? Were you, blissfully ignorant as a sort of a 10-year-old that didn't pick up on things? Because when I look at kids and I look at my own kids, they're different layers, right? Some kids, you can tell that they can sense the reverberation in a room when something happens.
Yep.
Other kids you go, wow, that looks like fun to just be in their own world and just kind of ping-ponging around. Where were you on that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I had a fantastic childhood, and I would have been looked at as probably someone who was just a normal kid, playing sports, having fun, going to concerts. But I also had of these prompts that came from probably, I think, my faith upbringing to some degree. But I remember doing a project in high school, my version of Norman Rockwell's 4 freedoms images: freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from hatred, I believe it was. But I did this piece and I thought, well, looking back now, I just took them out of the attic and thought, well, for a 14-year-old kid, that was pretty cool that, I was thinking that way. And so I think there's always been just that little part of me that wanted something more than just what's on the surface, I guess.
Does that explain that the work that you've done over the last decade in general is, look, a lot of people might have the inspiration for one book and they, maybe there's this sort of 2 or 3 year period where they commit to something like what you've done. But this is, 7 and 9 years. This is now, I would say that this is you. This is like pottery coming out of the oven. You've really formed this. This goes beyond just sort of a basic level of commitment. Where do you attribute that? It's not just the curious kid who at 14, help me understand that, because that level of contribution in the wake of the times that we live in, because I hear a lot of despair in people, not that they're, sort of self-harm despair, but this despair of like, I just don't know if I can afford to plug into the society that is around me. And that to me, there's like a despondent nature about it that is really hard to watch in the people that you care about, that you just know at a cursory level, but man, it's palpable.
I think a lot of that, in my experience, it has been when I started to get those better stories that I talked about, it was then, well, I want to get more stories. I want to lean into this area that I was sort of ignorant of, or my privilege prevented me from seeing. And so once you do that, then that becomes something that you grow passionate about and you want to share some of that. And I guess my pastor one time years ago said, you have a dancing mind. And so I love that idea that, you've got this mind that's like ping-ponging around. And frankly, as you know, there is a depletion that comes from caring for people, for caring for the world, and so you do need that self-protection, self-compassion. I talk at compassion fatigue workshops all the time about this 2-step dance of engaging and withdrawing that we can't just be doing in activism. We have to recalibrate. We have to retreat to silence and solitude and prayer and meditation and nature. So it's about doing that too, having the balance that helps kind of preserve me. And I enjoyed life. I believe that activists often, they let their own humanity die on the altar of their activism. They become just about the work, and then they're not physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally healthy. So it's trying to do that too, having a full existence of being a human so that you can go back and do the work.
What have you learned about yourself over the last, let's say, 20 years, John, that surprises you, that you might have thought, I know I have it in me to do these types of things and to contribute in the way that you have, but that you say, this has surprised me?
I think just the idea for me that writing wasn't something I aspired to do. The only time I was a songwriter, and I also wrote in the context of being a speaker at the church, but I never really considered that I could put together words that would be meaningful to other people who had no knowledge of me and no other frame of reference. And that's been the really surprising thing. That first blog post, it goes viral. I'm able to write a book. It gives me all this sort of energy to do the work I've been doing for a decade. But that was really just about a few hundred words that I released into the world, and those words did the work that only they could. So that's been the surprising thing. But then again, that's been the beautiful reminder how similar we actually are. And once those words reach people, then we connect in that level. So that's what I've learned.
What's the next project? What's the next idea that's swirling in your head? What's the big question that you haven't asked or you haven't contemplated that either you think it could sort of explode, or there could be blowback? I would think someone with your level of curiosity, that there are degrees of sort of like how far you're going to go, or the next big question that you haven't seen addressed, and you say, I'm going to take my at bat.
Well, I think,
as
Robert,
you cross your arms, by the way, for people.
Yeah, that's right. Let me think about that.
Your body language is.
I think I've been leaning into this journey over the past couple of years, primarily sparked by the pandemic, but everything that's happened in the last decade or so, is the universal grieving that we're doing. So we're grieving people we've lost who we've loved, but we're grieving family relationships or fractures in our community, or we're grieving our idea of the church or of America or of the future. And I think that grief is something I really am trying to explore. So I'm working on a book right now that will help people gather around the idea of the universal loss, so that maybe some of that tribalism falls away and we can sit with that. What does it mean to care deeply about something and to lose it? So that's a little bit of the work I think I'm doing right now that's exciting me.
What would you say to an audience of high schoolers that, and a high schooler might stand up and say, Mr. Pavlovitz, help me understand how to connect to inspiration. What do you say to that student in that audience?
I would say that there's always something, what pisses you off or what gives you incredible joy. Pay attention to both of those things. What does your heart gravitate toward, and what does it reject? Because those are alarms, or they're reminders of what you value and what you won't abide. We all have those things, and that helps formulate your why. Why are you here? You didn't choose to be here, but you are, and you always have two things. You have proximity and agency. You are always somewhere, and you can always do something. So given where you are, how do you want to leverage your life to make the world better? And so I'd have them start there.
I can see it now, and I think it's an incredibly powerful message, and it draws in, I think, at a visceral level, sort of their experience of life and at that stage of life. John, what a pleasure to spend some time with you. The book is worth fighting for, finding courage and compassion when cruelty is trending. John Pavlovitz, I hope this is the first of many conversations. I appreciate and applaud the courage that you demonstrate to talk about and build upon big ideas that need, I think, big solutions, big questions being asked, and continue to be evaluated, because we don't have the answers and they're not static in any form or fashion. So we really want to thank John Pavlovitz for his contribution, his scholarship, and his voice representing all people.
Thanks for taking the plunge into Headroom, where we uncover the why behind the what and who impacting our lives. Headroom is a production of Rainlight and co-produced by our friends at Old Soul. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and this is Headroom.